That's something that you caught on, I mean, it's spot on. I completely would put, hey, listen, this is the way I'm going to do it. If it's not happening this way, then that's not something I would want to, entertain or encourage.
So
So yeah,
Aditya, on our show, if you agree with something, you don't say it's correct, none of that. You say absolutely right because that's the name of the show.
okay, absolutely right. Let's go with that. I think that it's got a good ring to it also. So,
Yeah. Hi there, welcome to the Absolutely Right podcast, India's first graphology based leadership show. I'm your host, Aditi Surana. I'm a behavioral analyst, a high performance coach, and an anti anxiety expert. On our show, we use this phenomenal, accurate, and misunderstood subject of graphology or handwriting analysis to decode the secrets of leadership. Now, this is meant for smart professionals. Everybody who is on their journey, corporate journey, leadership journey, startup journey, to move to the next level and figure out what do they require to do exactly to become the leaders that they wish to be. This conversation is actually meant for that. We invite leaders, path breakers, high performers, and use their experience, their stories, their inspirations to find out what can you do to claim the best version of yourself. So if you haven't heard these episodes before and if you don't know what graphology is, check out our Friday series. I'm talking about what is graphology, how it works, and giving you ways in which you can actually implement it. But our Wednesday conversations are designed to interview these leaders and learn from them directly. Without further ado, let me invite today's guest on the show, Aditya Mehta, who is currently handling corporate strategy and development for Sony Pictures Networks India. Aditya comes from investment banking and venture capital funding background, and he decided to join Sony Pictures, as you can imagine, a media creative company. Being the number guy in the world of creatives is not the easy thing. And you and I know how it feels to be a misfit in any situation, be it the professional one. It is difficult, it has its own challenges. Now, this conversation is where Aditya tells us how he managed to sustain through the journey, deal with the conflict, especially with people who did not believe in him initially, and how he managed to execute things no matter what. As I analyze Aditya's handwriting, make sure that you keep your handwriting sample handy so that you can check out your own handwriting traits and see what kind of leader are you. Isn't that interesting? Let's get started. Hi Aditya, welcome to Absolutely Right.
hi, Aditi. Thank you for that.
So, we were talking about your career, your journey, and I want to introduce you and your overall career adventures to our listeners. Now,
Mhm.
before we start that, I want to tell our listeners that we actually have Aditya's handwriting sample. I asked Aditya to write on a blank, unruled sheet of paper. So, after how many years are you actually writing, Aditya?
Oh, wow. That's a good question. Actually, it's been ages, you don't get that opportunity to write that often. So I want to say a good 14, 15 years, maybe.
Yeah. So now that is mostly our FAQ kind of question. People ask me, if I don't write nowadays and I wrote, probably 10, 15 years ago, how can you talk about my personality? So I had a feeling that you haven't written in many, many years. So I'm
No,
going to still talk about it. And then at the end of it, we say, okay, is graphology still valid or not? We'll talk about that.
no.
But Aditya, we were talking about your journey, and from being a banker who was well established, work with best of the companies around the world, you decided to move to media, which
Mhm.
looks like a risky, unnecessary kind of move. Where does that come from?
I guess it comes from the appetite or the ability to take risks in the
Okay.
first place, and I think that's something that one needs to, at a certain stage or a phase in life, someone or one person needs to, take that risk and take that challenge in terms of moving careers or doing something completely drastic, sort of re-innovating themselves. And I think it stemmed from the fact that media as well as investment banking has a common thread in one sense, at least from a profile standpoint.
Okay.
So what I was doing in investment banking on the sell side, as we call it, where we are doing deals or consulting and work with a lot of companies. Here, the opportunity was to work with a particular company, that is Sony, in the media side, and then do similar job or similar kind of work with Sony. So whether I was doing joint ventures, whether I was doing M&A transactions, whether I was just strategizing and understanding what the growth trajectory of the company is. So it just sort of it worked parallel. I mean, it
But
was sort of hand and
what
glove.
were the challenges there? Like, one is similar ground, but what are the challenges of moving from complete banking and funding kind of space to this?
Sure. So I think the main challenge is understanding media itself. So I think in the first 6 months of my job, I was completely lost. I was, hey, listen, this is all a GRP game, and we're just chasing this on a weekly basis. This is not something I want to do. I don't know where I've got stuck.
Right.
Those certain teething or those certain apprehensions you have when you join a new job, which is completely different than what you were actually doing. I think those sort of came about at that point in time, and I'm talking about 8 years back. So yeah, it was everything that I thought would be difficult or tough, and I think post that, the first initial period, it was sort of smooth sailing. So I just guess you have to get yourself well entrenched into a particular space, find your comfort, know what your strengths are, and then sort of build on from there. And I think that's what essentially, at least from a similarity of work or from a profile of work, it was similar to that extent. But yes, I think the challenges were pretty much understanding media and how things work. So yeah.
I generally ask such questions later in the conversation, but as we are at it, so many times people, when they want to make the shift in their career or really want to choose passion over professional logical decision, they get caught into the same space that we are just
Sure.
talking about.
Sure.
And when you felt that this is like the biggest mistake that you have made or something absolutely difficult, what was your approach? How did you reach out, or what did you think in that moment to get out of that trap?
So I guess I think a lot of times when you change jobs or you change streams, I think everything is about patience and time.
Mhm.
I think that being, one essential part of it, because the learning happens on the way. It happens, on an everyday basis. You learn things new, you learn things, differently. And I think that's something that kept me going. Second thing that I did was, just reach out to a lot of people and build, relationships within the company, and reach out to people and understand the profile of work, the organization, what the culture of the company is, what the DNA style is. So those are certain things, and I think one thing that I've learned is, if you don't ask, you never get it.
Good
So it's
one.
important. It's important to sort of reach out to people and just ask, hey, listen, I require this help. I don't understand this, and educating yourself, and then saying at times, stepping back and say, listen, I don't know. I'll come back.
Which is a big deal. Most
Yeah,
of the time people can't do that. They want to, like,
exactly.
they don't want to be seen as somebody who doesn't know. And I
Yeah,
think that is also part of your risk taking ability for sure, to be rejected by people.
yeah, no, absolutely. I think it's a learning, right? If you know it all, then you're not learning, and I think that's something that's important for any person or any individual, whether it's professionally or personally. And I think that's something that, from my perspective, that's I like to keep it that way. You never learn everything, and I think it's just learning is just a process, and it's a journey. It's not something that you'll arrive and say, hey, listen, I know it all and I can faff my way through, or I know my way through things. So that's not the style or the approach that I take.
Okay. So, Aditya, I have your handwriting sample in front of me, and I'm looking at the multiple strokes that are weaving the story. The first thing that comes to my mind when I look at your writing is when you write the letter D, lowercase letter D, and you can look at your own sample if you have in front of you. There
Okay.
is a space between the legs of the D. So if you look at it properly, there is a vertical line and there is this A formation in any letter D. The
Sure.
vertical line branches out and it kind of breaks into two, creating an image as if a person is standing with his legs apart, completely in that Vishram position, as we say. You cannot move this person. You cannot convince him once he makes his mind about something. He's extremely firm to a point of being slightly stubborn, where you would not shift unless until the person you're speaking with really, really comes up with a convincing point.
Um, okay, I'm a little bit surprised.
Okay.
More, I would say pleasantly surprised rather.
Okay.
I think it's quite accurate.
Okay.
Professionally, that's something that I do, to great lengths. I have a chain, or, sort of a chain of thought, and I carry that on, and I believe in that, and I have that conviction to then take it through. Uh, and I guess it's a lot about knowing your own strengths and where your weaknesses lie. And I
Mhm.
think that's something that you caught on, I mean, it's spot on. I completely would put, hey, listen, this is the way I'm going to do it. If it's not happening this way, then that's not something I would want to entertain or encourage.
So
So yeah.
Aditya, on our show, if you agree with something, you don't say it's correct, none of that. You say absolutely right because that's the name of the show.
Okay, absolutely right. About that, I think that it's got a good ring to it also. So,
Yeah, thank you.
I think a lot of things. A lot of times, Aditi, you're in a difficult spot, right? And even though you're firm, you've taken a decision on certain things. There's always you try to entertain or think about balance between, say, logical reasoning and then emotional reasoning.
Hmm.
How does one sort of break through that, and it becomes sometimes sometimes the lines get really blurry.
Sure,
So
of course.
how do you go through that, and I would sort of want to understand what do you what do you
Okay.
see.
So before I even answer that question, I'm going to do a little bit of debriefing on this question because it's really important. What you're talking about is being caught between heart and your head. It's
Yeah.
literally looking at things where your passion lies in one area and your logic tells you to not quit, not jump on other ideas, just hold on to things which you should be doing.
Yeah.
And the battle within is mostly tiring, and people do not know which one to opt for because both of them are right in their own ways. And we can fight other people when we have our conviction in the right place, but it is very difficult to fight anybody when you are pulled between these two extremes. And all of us have gone through that point where we know what we should be doing and what we would like to do.
That's true.
Now, if I look at your writing to answer this question, the first thing that stands out for me to build this analogy is the part of emotional thinking, is where we find empathy being higher,
Mhm.
you being someone who is very excited about things that you pick up. When we look at the lowercase letter v, instead of being completely pointed, if it is slightly soft. Now
Mhm.
I'm looking at all the letter V that you have in this particular sample, or
Mhm.
also it is found in the H formation where the vertical line connects to the rounded part. There, if it is the instead of being pointed, if it is soft, it's a
Mhm.
similar formation. I
Okay.
don't really find that emotionally driven thinking here.
Mhm.
Okay, I do see you're more logical, you're more analytical when it comes to your information, but for you to be convinced, you
Mhm.
keep gathering information.
Mhm.
And that is not necessarily emotional, that could be practical, that could be data, that could be talking to people, but your communication with people is data gathering, which very few people are aware of. They think, oh, he's chilling, he's having a conversation, but if you are on to something, you have to gather all the information needed, and you do that by talking to people a lot. but
Mhm.
but that's what matters. So are you being emotional in that conversation? Are you emotionally driven by the idea? I feel the strength of your execution or being a leader that you are is actually not being emotional easily.
Mhm.
It takes a
Okay.
lot of conviction, lot of convincing, or a lot of the idea has to be really really fabulous for you to fall for it.
Okay.
Otherwise you won't fall for things. You generally have like this neutral idea to look at things, and you ask a lot of questions to a point that people like feel scared to talk to you at times because you keep asking questions until unless you don't find your answers.
Mhm.
Now, having said that, there is a slight degree of impulsive behavior. I'm
Mhm.
saying that because your writing goes to the right.
Okay.
So, in the moment when you're talking, interacting, connecting with people, they may think that you are operating from emotions. But only you know this, and probably five people who are very, very close to you, they would vouch by this statement that I'm about to make, that though you come across as somebody who is excited, impulsive, and walking into the situation with energy, you
Mhm.
won't necessarily act on it. You gather that information, you have these observations, and then when you analyze things, you
Mhm.
become absolutely logical.
Mhm.
But it is a rare quality for people to look at.
So I just want to just on this what you've sort of mentioned. I think you're absolutely right. I think that's something that is very factual and very true. I think in my conversations with people, a lot about information gathering. It's a lot about conversing. Understanding and then piecing things together. I think
Mm.
that's something that is. Uh, I believe it adds to a lot of the work or the repertoire that I have built over a period of time. And that information sharing or that information knowledge gathering is extremely important from the kind of job or the kind of profile that I have. it connects the dots for a lot of people within the firm. And I think that's something that has come about by this particular virtue or this particular quality, or just thinking that I do not know it all. And it's all about learning, and it's the process that you take on and the journey that you walk on. And I think that's the most important thing. So if there's something that I really want to glean or understand from a conversation, I really try to merge or get into the thick of things to get there, find a proper solution. And then you're right, it's a lot about analytically thinking through things and then putting it into perspective. So yeah.
So, Aditya, I want to ask you this question. If
Mhm.
somebody imbibe this concept or this, idea, and it's an uncomfortable one for many, many people, they don't know how to ask questions or also how to be okay or how to be, this so-called new learner in a corporate environment.
Yeah.
Otherwise, socially, you may ask whatever questions, but here, where you are constantly evaluated and people are there to label you, look at you, whether you know this or not,
Yeah.
how do you then stand there and still be vulnerable enough to say that I don't know or please teach me? What are the things that you keep in mind if our listeners have to learn from you?
Sure. I think at that point in time, one, I think it's important to sort of listen and acknowledge certain things.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and I think when that happens, at times when you go through a set of data, it is all about absorbing also. It's about going through the motions and, understanding what makes sense. When you're going into a meeting, you probably will not know everything about, a particular project or a particular topic. And at that point in time, when you do not know, it's just better to listen through, absorb it, then analyze it in your own head, saying, hey, listen, this is the new kind of information that I have got. Let me go back to the drawing board and come back. And I think that's just, the acceptability of that is something that uh, I have learned over a period of time and over the years. It's not, and it's very, and it's difficult, it's challenging because everyone comes from different parts of the country. People come with different mindsets, different ideologies,
Right.
different ways of functioning. It's just about I guess putting yourself out there and being open to being vulnerable. And I think that's important because everyone's there to learn every day. People want to prove a point, and people who don't want to prove a point, or people who don't want to go the extra mile, it can be seen. And people who want to, they try to find solutions. And I think once you get to that stage of, hey, listen, I'm listening, I'm understanding, and I'm going to find the solution, and I'll come back to you. And once you do that, people then believe that, hey, listen, he was in a vulnerable state, he didn't know the answer, he went back to the drawing board, got the answers, found the solution, executed the project. Hey, hooray. And I think that's the journey, or that's the path I follow. I think consistently and diligently every single time I get into a little bit of a fix. People use these high funda words about multitasking, right? And say, hey, listen, I'm a multitasker. And sometimes, and I think most times, a lot of things fall between or slip between the lip and the cup. So how do you sort of navigate through, and how do you look at those elements, at least probably with with my handwriting in one sense.
So, in the simplest terms, are you a multitasker? Hell no, absolutely not. You hate multitasking. What
Okay.
you love the most is getting involved in that one conversation, in that one specific objective question that you're trying to solve, getting as deep as possible. So, when people expect you to multitask, that means you have to leave what you're doing and engage with people casually or like in multiple things casually. So, it's like marriage versus casual dating.
Mhm.
Absolutely the marriage kind of a person. You want to go deep, you really want to invest your time and energy to know the crux of it, to really solve the problem. And for some reason, it's not because of your profession, but it has been a part of your personality even from childhood, that every time you're confronted with a problem, you
Mhm.
wanted to get an answer to be prepared for the next time.
Okay.
So you wanted to not only learn how to resolve this particular situation, but also be ready for things that will prepare you for tomorrow. And which is weird. Like mostly kids are not like that. And I'm calling you weird because this is really being ready or preparing for something large,
Mhm.
even when you're solving really, really small problems.
Aditi, I probably don't know that this is something I know about myself. So this is a new learning for me.
Okay.
And when I look back and think, through the words that you actually, stitched up in the sentence that you made, somewhere I feel it is true. It is something that I tend to do, because I always at all points in time look at the larger picture, whether it's
Uh-huh.
personally or professionally. And I think when you're working in a professional setting, the objective is to find a particular solution, to any particular situation. When you're on a personal note, you're always striving for that next step or the next level of happiness, and it could be monetary, it could be non-monetary, it could be whatever that is required. So you're right when you look at, or you're absolutely right when you look at it, from a, when you pull my, when I pull myself out and look at it from that perspective, I always tend to look at the big picture, and I think that's
Let
the
me
whole
let
point.
me make it easier for you.
Sure.
When you are solving a problem, instead of just getting done with it in the moment, do you go and figure out what caused this problem? What we could have avoided so that this problem would have never existed?
At times, and not at times. Not at times is because you know that that problem existed, and you prolong the problem for a
You
great
created.
number of time. And then at times you know that, listen, you know that there's a problem and you need to fix it. So yeah, it's very situational, and it really depends on, for example, professionally, it depends on who's on the other side. So it's pretty much, I follow the rule, horses for courses. So you don't put your cards right up. You
Sure.
tend to play at times a little bit blind to just understand. But yeah, in the back of your head or back of your mind, you keep the bigger picture in mind, saying, hey, this is where I want to go and this is where I want to reach. And it could not necessarily be the destination, but it could just be the journey along. So I was in the boardroom with probably 35 other people, and we were getting into a situation of a post merger integration.
Mhm.
Okay. And when we are doing that, there are different number of people, different work streams, whether it's IT, whether it's legal, whether it's HR, whether it's, you name it, whether it's the business
Of
itself,
course.
uh, multiple number of people, multiple number of stakeholders. There was a comment from a very, very, very senior executive at that point in time, and this I'm talking about 4 years back. He made a statement in passing, way older than me, way far more experienced than me. Okay. He made a statement which was kind of condescending,
Okay.
and I just stood back. I heard him out, and I just kept my calm. And there were 35 people, mind you, and I was the project leader on this thing because I was doing the post-merger integration. And he said something that was not appropriate at that point in time, so everyone was just a
Was
little
it also
puzzled.
personal? I'm just asking in terms of
No, it was
impact.
not personal. It was regarding a certain department, and I actually just stepped back and I said, let him complete. We finished the conversation. I tried to explain it in my manner, which is the most mildest and balanced manner. And I said, I think these are probably the pros of looking at it, or probably the cons of looking at it. We finished the conversation. The matter got settled. I think by the end of the conversation, the end of the meeting, I uh, I passed a comment which was more of a humorous one, and I think everyone burst out into and sort of cracked up and say, okay, fine, like. And post that, there were four people who came to me and said, Aditya, this was a very difficult conversation to have with someone so senior. And how did you keep your calm? Because if we were in your situation, we would have snapped back, like, and
Yeah.
quite aggressively. And I said, it's not about that, right? I mean, there's a matter of experience. There's a matter of acceptance that, the person across the table is a lot more experienced than I am. He has a point of view. If I'm going to start feeling bad about, everything anyone says, the work will not get done. And for me, the most important thing is getting this integration done. So,
Correct.
I want to look at that and not look at these smaller pieces. So, yeah.
I think this is a great example that you just gave, which talks about how socially you can be very easy in communicating, which I was referring to the right slant of your writing,
Mhm.
and at the same time keeping the logical mind that you are focused on the final result and
Yep.
not giving into your emotional journeys and including people being, attacking you in an egoistic manner. So I think that's brilliant.
But that's the nature of corporate job, Aditi. I think it comes with the it comes with the territory. So, yeah.
Okay. Not to everybody, I would say. I've met so many people and I keep studying them. I wish it comes to everyone, but it does not. And I think that's what differentiates the leader from other people.
I guess. I
Yeah.
guess. I think next question I probably want to ask is, um, I asked you on multitasking. I spoke about emotional reasoning. I was just trying to understand. Hey, listen, is there an emotional bend I have from a decision making standpoint? I want to sort of ask you in terms of, where do you see, limitations? Where do you see, sort of sort of hitting the dead end, or hitting, saying, hey, listen, these are certain aspects, or these are certain facets that you probably not thought about, or probably not are not looking at it from a, from a fine comb standpoint. So
Okay.
yeah.
So, can you give me an example of why are you asking me this question?
Uh, Question pretty much because I've been 8 years at where I am. One being that. Uh, Second, I mean, jokes apart, and I really like my job. I really enjoy it, but I want to know what it takes to go to the next level. And I think every single person at, I'm 39, right? So for me, I want to know where I'm going to go next, and what it's going to take for me to go, and if there are any limitations, what do I need to do to overcome them?
Makes
So
sense.
just from that perspective. Yeah.
I think that just shows your learnability. So I'm going to begin with this trend that you have, which is your learnability.
Okay.
When you write letter T and H together,
Hmm.
the height of letter H is slightly taller than letter T.
Okay.
Now, anybody with that combination uh, has a trait which is very unique, where the ability to learn and mold themselves is much higher. So when you're thrown into a situation that you have no clue how to deal with, how to go about, you somehow roll with the punches and stand and figure out what I can learn from this, or how can I go to the next level,
Hmm.
which is a rare quality for sure. So I would say that's one thing that you should give it to yourself. And obviously, in your conversation and your behavior, it comes out very, very often.
Okay.
Now, what are the challenges? When I look at the upper loops of your writing, where we talk about the imagination, the intellectual, the thinking aspects are,
Mhm.
your upper zones represent very logical thinking, but not necessarily imaginative or even creative at times. So
Okay.
when you are dealing with people, and as your team grows, people come up with different perspectives, different ideations, different belief systems, and sometimes to be tolerant of that is slightly challenging for you, because if you're very clear about what can get the results going, then you don't want to waste your time. You want to get with it, you're going to get done with it. And because you have figured a way around it, and because you've done it so many times, you tend to believe that's like the best possible way. Second thing I feel, where we can really take your journey to the next level, you already have this phenomenal way of executing things. I'm
Mhm.
going to tell you graphologically what I mean. When
Okay.
you cross your letter T, lowercase letter T, you cross them in the middle. And now, anybody who does that has this ability to execute things to the T. Okay. But the T's are also the cross T's, which means there is a point most of the time at the end of it that talks about your very, very clear to a point of being blunt with people when you communicate. So you get things done, you execute them beautifully, but
Yeah.
because you're so clear and blunt, there is very little space for people to then argue. So, execution being your forte or the strength that, like you shine with,
Mhm.
do you think there are things that we can talk to our listeners about where they can improve execution? Because, as a leader, you of course you have to have the vision and you have to get things going and you have to see things that the people haven't seen.
Sure.
But if you don't get the work done, then all these ideas are great, but at the end, the execution is what will
Absolutely.
propel the organization forward. So if you have to look at, and what is your style of execution, and what do you keep in mind?
So I think, Aditi, from an execution standpoint, right? I think the most important thing, and that's my strength, is working with numbers. I come from a finance background. It's important to gather as much relevant, possible, quantifiable, and focused data.
Mm.
Uh, Analyze the data, see what actually makes sense. Try to understand a what the big picture is, b what your stakeholders want,
Mm.
see how are you going to best possibly navigate it in the least possible time,
Okay.
and then try and deliver results that actually are quantifiable, things that will then people will say, hey, listen, you did this entire exercise, we had not thought about it, and this is the kind of impact it's created, whether it's a direct impact in the in the bottom line, or indirect impact where it's helped a certain business grow, probably 2x or 3x, and I think that is important to sort of carry along with you, that these aspects of it, right? Keep the big picture in mind, get your data right, sift through, multiple layers of data to understand what makes sense, because that, I mean, data is, it's chunk, right? I mean, a lot of chunk is there, and you need to sort of clear out the weeds and understand what makes sense. Once you do that and you understand the overall objective, and carry your stakeholders and be responsible for, the project that you've taken on.
So, do you think there are people who are not data driven and there are people who are data driven, or it is matter of interest according to you?
No, I think a lot of people in organizations with different skill sets, they use data as they please, and it's not so linear. I think people generally tend to use a lot of gut, saying, "Hey, this is what I believe." A
Right.
lot of people use data to make certain level of decisions and certain, certain. Uh, and these are certain skill sets that people have, and I think it's just a matter of interest, and it's a matter of doing things the right way. Where I come from, media, there is a lot of science behind it, but there is a lot of art behind it also. And I think to sift through, those layers are important. Uh, there are a lot of people you'll find in media who are all artsy and, art driven. And, I'm someone who is science driven, and I want
Right.
to find the reasoning and logical aspects of things or two things, and then take a decision in that particular light. So it really depends. I keep that lens on probably 24/7, and therefore that creative bend of mine is not that
True.
accelerated. But yeah, it just comes with it.
But
Just
also, Aditya, what you're saying is your job demands that you do the job of somebody who will look at the numbers and would
yeah, yeah,
let that fall,
absolutely,
of course.
absolutely,
Okay. What else people
absolutely.
can keep in mind when it comes to
Um,
execution?
I think in terms of execution is understanding. I think part of it that we didn't talk about is stakeholder management. I think that's the most important and integral part of it. I think when you're executing a particular project, you're not executing it just for yourself, you're executing for the company, right? And there are multiple layers of multiple stakeholders. For example, and I'll give you an example, right? I mean, the work that I do, I have a reporting line uh, to Culver City, which is in Los Angeles. I have a reporting line to Tokyo. So, and those are my stakeholders too. And I have a reporting line to my immediate boss, who's the CEO of the company. It's important. And then there are other stakeholders, which are business stakeholders, people who are actually running the business. There are other stakeholders who are enablers or support functions, and those are my stakeholders too. So managing and doing it in the most interpersonal ways or most sociable manner, where you're approachable, you're acceptable, and you're carrying people along, and you're giving due credit where it actually belongs. I think that is another part of it which is
Well
extremely
said.
important in execution. It's extremely important in execution. I think that's something that uh, to me has been the biggest takeaway, because as you grow and as you build your professional career and you chart it out, it becomes less about technical skills, it becomes a
Hmm.
lot more about soft skills.
True.
So, the more softer skills you build over a period of time, you'll be able to understand styles, you'll understand, leadership qualities, you'll understand how you need to get out of a particular tough situation. And it's just navigating through that. Yeah.
Must acknowledge this, sorry to interrupt you, but I
Yeah.
feel as a person, this is not your natural behavior to be able to understand people or work with them. You, of all the people, take extra efforts to make sure that you build these soft skills,
Oh,
which I
totally.
think is phenomenal because naturally some people are gifted with that ability to understand
Yeah.
because you realize halfway through your career that that is not my bend of mind. You decided to build on it and cultivate, and I think that requires more work.
And Aditi, you're right, but it's an extreme, right? Coming from an investment banking background where it is just project led, you're the project leader, you're the project executor, you're the finally
Right.
originating the project yourself, at a certain point in time. So it's just a very straight blinkered thought at that point in time. When you step into a corporate world and you step into something that's very, there are a lot of people who have a lot of opinions and a lot of suggestions about certain things, right? You need to understand which makes sense, which don't make sense, and then navigate through. And the ones that don't make sense, you need to sit them down and say, hey, listen, it's not making sense for these are the reasons. Whether it's data driven, whether it's a perspective, or whether it's just something that you don't believe matches with the vision of the company. Uh, and I guess it's just something that I had to learn over a period of time, saying I can do only so much if I am doing investment banking, but if I'm part of a different journey, I'll get to understand different styles of working, and I think it's just learning on the way again.
So we got to see the professional side, we got to see
Yeah.
the problem solver that you are.
Mhm.
But we haven't learned much about Aditya as a person. Like, of course, I have dived deep and spoken about the personality and behavior and traits. But, from from the perspective or where you are professionally, what do you think are the challenges that you face, or what are the things that I can answer in that space?
I think sometimes when you're, you said this on the professional side, but on the personal side, it's always when you're with your loved ones and your near and dear ones, it's always difficult to say no. How do you, how do you get to those boundaries, or where you say, hey, listen, okay, fine, this is not making sense. Professionally, you can do it beautifully. But when it comes
Sure.
personally, then this whole emotional side comes in, hey, listen, maybe I'm not doing this right. So, those, so I think that's pretty much the question, where do you draw the
Okay.
line, and where do you cross across the boundaries? Yeah.
So I'm going to bring in this angle of being a listener,
Uh-huh.
that you are and you're not. So we find that in the lowercase letter e. If the
Okay.
loop in the e is open and it
Mhm.
is well rounded, then you are a great listener.
Okay.
And if it is squeezed and non existent, then you are a selective listener, which
Okay.
means you pretend that you're listening and not necessarily listening to the actual conversation, getting to the conclusion, and you want people to move forward. I
Okay.
hope you're listening to me now, but
Totally.
the degree of interest depends on the pace of the conversation, especially for you. If the person is really slow and repetitive, you lose them. You're like, okay, okay, okay. So you start getting impatient with them. When you try to get to the conclusion without letting them feel that they are heard, is
Mhm.
where the conflict comes from.
Okay.
Professionally, other people don't expect you to hear them out. They're like, okay, I want to say my point, and whether he's hearing, listening, not listening, I'm going to make sure that I say that. Whereas on an emotional level, personal relationship, that is not the actual thing. So people really want you to be receptive. So
Okay.
I always tell my students, so we run this mental gym on a weekly basis. I have a simple thought. I believe, why to wait for anxiety or depression to come? Like your physical health, what if you practice certain mental and emotional regimes or workouts that can keep you mentally and emotionally fit? So we call it the mental gym.
Okay.
And we had a session on listening skills just last week.
Mhm.
And I told my students that if you are interested, you don't have to do the right body language to listen to people. You don't have to like repeat their words. You don't have to do any of it. You
Okay.
just have to be interested. And one of my students said, but this is really boring. Like I can pretend to be interested, but I'm not interested. That's the truth. I'm
Uh-huh.
like, point taken. If you're not interested and if you still want to look at that, then how think about how important the person is.
Mhm.
So it is not in the content that you would take interest, but only in the content creator.
Okay.
So when your mom is repeating things, and you know how moms just go about saying things over and over again.
Oh,
So it's not about what they're trying to say. They just want you, their son, to be available and hear and actually just say that I'm there. Whatever you require, I will be there to take care of you.
okay.
And that is not translated by saying these things, that is translated by physically being present.
Mhm.
So every person has this different level of, I would say, emotional quotient or
Okay.
quota that you have to kind of fill in for everybody to feel happy,
Mhm.
especially in a personal space. Professionally, people take care of themselves, or they go to their families to get that quota filled.
So, anything else you can gauge from the
So
handwriting?
I feel you're very, very sharp in gathering information and observing people. And
Okay.
I feel currently you are not able to use all the information that you gather
Mhm.
towards a particular objective. And
Okay.
this is where I feel the slight disconnect is happening. Probably the projects that you were learning a lot from, I
Mhm.
think the learning curve has worn out. And
Okay.
now you want to get to a project or get into a situation where you don't know anything. And
Mhm.
because that opportunity is not presenting itself, is where the challenge happens. We say learnability is a great skill, and
Sure.
very few people have it naturally.
Mhm.
Because you have it, you kind of identify yourself from this whole space of learning and constantly moving forward and going to the next level. Now,
Okay.
if that is not happening, if you're not feeling that you're up for a next challenge where you can reinvent yourself,
Mhm.
you feel absolutely stuck.
Mhm.
And I think this is where the current situation is becoming little irritating for you, or you're getting impatient. So
Okay.
if the learning curves are not happening naturally,
Mhm.
one, I would request you to create such things that would really help you to question and create your own learning curves. If that is not possible, start picking up hobbies and parallel learnings, or start teaching people where things, you have to break them down for the students to understand or for you to learn something else.
Sure.
That in that manner you would question your ability, you'd question your space of keeping the learning curve on.
Absolutely right on that. I think that's something that I diligently, focus on. In fact, even when you said about learning, that's something that I'm dedicating myself to at least doing that, just sort of reinventing myself and trying to see, what else or what next. That's something that I guess it comes from that part of impatience, or comes from that part
No,
of,
no, it also comes from the part of being an end result oriented
yeah,
person, which I was talking about, the T bar in the middle.
yeah,
Now,
yeah.
what that leads to is you have to have that clear goal that, it's literally like a bullseye. Once you get that, you'll hit it. And if you can't, you'll find ways in which you will figure the formula and still do it. Now, most people forget that the organization may or may not give you that platform. Till the
Mhm,
time it does, you enjoyed it, and no matter how tough it was, you were there and you're figuring it out. The
mhm,
fact that right now it is not doing it,
mhm,
it is the tough part of the story. So probably it's the time for you to either pick up your new learning curves,
mhm.
and that end goal, I would also look at it little creatively, is
Okay.
about what kind of leader would you like to become. If you kind of start putting those ideas out to yourself more than anybody else. But today, when the situation doesn't demand you to think in that manner, and if you do that proactively, you
Mhm.
might commit to building the skills that otherwise you feel you do not have. Because you, one thing for sure is you are highly self-critical and self-evaluative. So you're aware of everywhere you go wrong and you
Yeah.
keep making notes of it.
Mhm.
So it's very difficult for you to miss things that you kind of get wrong. You're very vigilant about it.
Yeah. No, you're right. You're absolutely right about that. I think that's something that I am. I tend to you tend to do that when you're probably in a very different environment, and I think that's it's important. It just keeps you on your guard more than anything
Mm,
else. Just being self-critical, knowing that where your lapses are, and then trying to navigate it, so it, as you said, doesn't happen next time around. So yeah.
mm. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think I've covered everything I wanted to say, and you got to like definitely pick up things that are exciting. I think that is the biggest missing part here. And at least for last 2.5, 3 years, that has been the case. So
Mhm.
now it is absolutely getting to you. So
It's
what I was,
pandemic.
sorry?
It's the pandemic.
No, I think it's pandemic is like 18 months. I'm talking about 3 years. So
Yeah.
this
Oh, yeah.
started much before the pandemic. Pandemic has probably given you time to like look into the mirror and not avoid it whatsoever. Now you cannot like deny it anymore.
No,
So
absolutely.
that makes it uncomfortable, but it started much before that. So high
No,
time.
absolutely, I think. Absolutely right, Aditi. I think the show is named properly. uh, and aptly so. So yeah, I think a lot of the stuff you said, and I think it's been great. This is not something that I knew of or understood of, and I think it's just sort of an eye opener for me also. A lot of things that you've spoken about, a lot of knowledge sharing that you've done. Uh, so yeah, I think there are certain things that I need to reflect on, and then there are certain things that I need to impart. Probably somewhere in between will land.
But I would say find the easiest or the quickest way to start teaching things,
Yeah,
because that would become the easiest way for you to communicate.
sure.
Writing is not the best friend that you have. Let's accept that. But speaking can be. So if you can't necessarily make your writing creative or write articles and blogs, which I otherwise would have said, why don't you start expressing yourself?
Yeah,
But because when I look at your writing, that is not something that comes naturally, but speaking does. So
yeah,
if you pick that up and start teaching, even like smaller concepts, break it down for people and do it as a project. Don't do it as a long-term commitment because you may
sure.
get bored, but
Mhm.
do it as a project and you might really find something there.
Maybe. Well, that's great.
Yeah. Thank you, Aditya. Thank you so
Thank you
much for
so
being
much
on
for
the show.
joining. No, thank you, Aditi. I think it was great.
Thank you so much for joining me one more time on the Absolutely Right podcast. Tell me which were your favorite parts. You can write to me on my email ID, WRIT, at aditisurana.com. If you like, you can send me a message or make a little quick video and tag my Instagram handle at Aditi Surana. Now, in the middle of the conversation, I spoke about something called a mental and emotional gym called APT. APT stands for Aspire, Perform, and Transform. If you want to figure out how can you keep yourself up to date and move forward on your journey, you can check out the link aptforme.com. We keep doing free webinars for you to know more about it. The whole idea of this module is not to wait for the mental health to go so down that you can't deal with the problems, but actually work with the help of mental tools, emotional tools on a weekly basis to strengthen yourself. And as we understand that about body, the same thing is applicable about mind. If you want to learn graphology, you can know all the information about that and the other services that we have for you and your organization on my website, aditisurana.com. I'll see you on Friday with our special graphology series one more time. Till then, happy writing.